More federal employees are finding themselves out of a job this week as the Trump administration continues to make massive cuts to its workforce. The Federal Aviation Administration is the latest federal agency to face cuts, with potentially hundreds of workers being told over the weekend they were getting laid off. The firings impacted workers like safety personnel and maintenance crews, not air traffic controllers. We know they are experiencing a massive shortage. The union representing FAA workers warned the agency is already facing a staffing shortfall, and these removals could only worsen that. Despite the backlash, President Trump is forging ahead with his plan to drastically reduce the size of the federal government, even asking the Supreme Court to get involved in his effort. At least 70 lawsuits have been filed against the Trump administration so far. 10 of them are employment-related. President Trump has filed an emergency appeal with the Supreme Court over one of those cases, asking the justices to reverse a lower court ruling and allow him to fire the head of the Office of Government Ethics. CBS News Chief White House correspondent Major Garrett joins me now here in the studio. Just a treat to have you here in New York. What is the general consensus in Washington? That, yes, maybe there is waste that needs to be cut at the federal level, but is it being done too hastily? And what departments are people most concerned about?
So haste is a very serious question. It may not be a question for the country writ large yet, because they're thinking, well, President Trump said he was going to move in this direction, maybe not as specifically as the actions so far indicate, but he's moving in a direction they're generally supportive of. In Washington, though, most people know two things. 80% of the federal workforce does not live in D.C., Virginia, or Maryland. It's across the country. One of the largest places where you'll find federal employees, Lindsay, is Texas, California, Florida, New York. They're dispersed all over the country. Point two, when you talk about the CDC, the NIH, FAA, NTSB, IRS, these are agencies that Americans either rely on or interact with on a customer service basis. And if any changes come to them that they're not pleased with, they will associate one with the other. So governance is an important thing, and governance intersects with politics when governance lets you down. I'm not predicting that, but the Elon Musk, Donald Trump orientation to this is no one will notice, except you'll save money and everything will be better and more efficient. Okay, that's a theory. If it falls down in practice, there will be a political consequence.
It's not like anybody looks forward to making that call to the government either, to the IRS, and who knows what that interaction may be now. That institution is facing cuts. We know that lawsuits against some of the Trump administration's firings laws were passed by Congress to protect those jobs. And so is the president asking the Supreme Court to make an exception for him, consider an exception for him, or essentially undo precedent?
To reevaluate. And this court has reevaluated things. It has reevaluated presidential immunity. It's reevaluated abortion rights in this country. It has reevaluated regulatory controls and powers within the federal government. It did so famously in a case called Chevron, which I won't go into, but it basically overturned or reoriented 40 years of understood regulatory power in Washington. So the president is betting it's at least worth asking this Supreme Court, constituted with 3 of his appointees, with a 6-3 conservative majority, if it will give him more latitude than previous Supreme Courts have given previous presidents about this matter. His assumption is it's worth trying and he may prevail. If he does, it would overturn precedent and give him even more executive authority.
Every president wants to surround themselves with their own people, you know, replace people with people that they like. Are inspectors general, or, for example, the head of the Office of Government Ethics, immune from that? Are they supposed to be?
Congress passed a law about inspectors general. If you're going to fire an inspector general, you have to notify Congress 30 days in advance and explain why. President Trump did not do that in either instance. For any of the inspectors generals, he's summarily fired upon taking office. So he's in clear violation of the law. Is someone going to sue him over that? Is someone in Congress going to say?
Outcry.
Right. Is someone in Congress say, how dare you? We wrote this law. A previous president signed it. You're bound by this. The president at this moment in this area does not feel particularly bound, and he's willing to press in every direction for this reason. Well, many reasons, but this, I think, primary reason. He knows he's on a short timeline. Elon Musk can only work for the government for 6 months as a special government employee. And the president knows that if he doesn't move as rapidly as possible, break through as many of these barriers as possible, he won't get very far. If he leaves it to Congress, as previous presidents have, and work through the system, his assumption is it will all grind to a halt. So better to push things as hard as you can, see what you can accomplish.
I
And
thought
then,
it had more to do politically with the midterms and making sure that Republicans.
I don't think this president is that concerned about the midterms. Republicans feel very emboldened right now politically. That might be a miscalculation. I think this is much more. It's a 6-month time limit on Elon Musk and those working for him. And the faster you push, the more likely you are to succeed at least some of your goals. I think that's the internal White House assumption.
Very interesting. So we are seeing the Trump administration trying to rehire some of the people that they laid off, particularly the National Nuclear Security Administration. What's your take there?
Well, the president realized very quickly that that's a bad call, that the optics of that are just terrible.
What are the optics?
Well, if they're in charge of monitoring the safety, workability of our nuclear weapons and stockpile, then they should be kept on, especially when the president is talking as expansively he is about how valuable those are to us, how they could be negotiating chips with Russia and China and possible arms reductions. You want that locked down and under very close supervision. It also suggests that in areas where, if in the future, it suddenly becomes clear to the president that politically he needs to prioritize some of these things, he may double back on some of the other firings. But in this one, he went, then he whoop. That was a hot stove moment. A rare hot stove moment.
Putting it in context that I can understand as someone who has burned herself many times. Major Garrett, thank you so much.
Sure.